Hello and welcome to the New Life Pharmacy webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on board. I realize that the most important thing in your life is your child, or in fact your children. And I thought, well, as your local community pharmacist, what could I do to help you with perhaps sometimes the difficult task of bringing up a child concerning medication and all the ailments that they tend to have as they're growing up. Now, the good thing is that the frequency of age in terms of your immune system as you grow up is you're going to have about probably 6 colds a year under 1 year. And I'm going to go back to Dr. Sarah Brown at the end, but if we start, in fact, with coughs and colds, and really you think, well, the child's always got a cold, of course, when they go to nursery. The good thing is by the time they reach about between 5 and 9 years, they're only going to have about 3 colds a year, so things do get better. Now, about 6 years ago, the MHRA, that was the, if you like, the governing body that looks at medicines, realized that in fact there are some ingredients in medicines which are in fact dangerous for young children. And so they took a lot of the ingredients out of the cough bottles, and in fact under 2 as well, they took even more out. And it's very, very important to ask advice in the pharmacy if you are buying a medicine for your child. And clearly there's a minor ailment service if you're registered with us, and we will obviously prescribe for you if necessary. Now, I was at a friend's house about a couple of weeks ago, and they were looking after a niece and nephew, and I said to them, right, well, what if the child's ill or maybe got a temperature? What do you do about that? And they said, well, I'd probably phone the mother, which is a good idea. But we had a look in their medicine cabinet, and all they had was a packet of Disprin, which is aspirin. And as probably you all know, no one should be taking aspirin who's under 16. But do you know the reason? Well, the reason is, in fact, it's because of Ray's syndrome, and it's a very, very rare syndrome, but in fact, aspirin makes it worse. And what happens is there's an enlargement, swelling of the brain, so it's extremely dangerous. So that's why we don't allow aspirin under 16, and they've even taken the aspirin component out of Bonjela, which you use probably for children's teething, because they found that in fact, because it's a component of aspirin, they've now made it very safe with just a local anaesthetic similar to Calgel. Now, I know Dr. Brown, when we do the interview with her, I'm absolutely delighted to have her on board, then she talks about temperature quite a lot and how to get temperatures down and when to be really worried if your child is carrying on with a temperature. So we'll go into that later. In fact, if you go onto the website www.newlifepharmacy.co.uk, you will in fact see me. It was very useful, a little chap called Callum. It's very nice of him to come in and be my model for the day in terms of getting his temperature taken. So you can see that little clip of video if you go onto the website. I hope you enjoy it. But we're using an Omron thermometer, and I'll go into that a little bit later as we go through the program. Now, the next part is, in fact, a rather jerky video. I apologize about that, but that's what happens over webinars. And what I'm doing here is measuring a small dose of a liquid. And perhaps you need to maybe give your child, say, a 2.5 ml dose. And it's just getting rid of the air and measuring it in this way. The other thing that Dr. Brown said was that if you need to get liquids into a child quickly, say they're very dehydrated, then you can use this syringe. It's really quite useful to get the liquid into the child's cheek and in quite quickly. So that's a good way of doing it. So if you want to know about oral syringes, just call in. Now, what I'm suggesting is, in terms of timing of medicines, this is something that I don't think, whether it's adults or you looking after your child, really know an awful lot about. because when a medicine says, for example, 3 times a day, well, what does that mean? And when you have to use, say, an antibiotic for your child, it's very important to use the antibiotic correctly. And for example, if it says 3 times a day, what we mean by that is every 8 hours. And that's quite difficult if you've got a young child, because really it's first thing in the morning, say 7 o'clock, and then 3 in the afternoon, and late at night, maybe 11. And that's quite difficult, I know, for you to give it that way. And the older fashioned antibiotics, things like the penicillin V's and the Fluclox, which is given for impetigo young children, these are given on an empty stomach. And that's always difficult in terms of how do you give that properly. It's usually 4 times a day. So we give it about an hour before each meal, which is difficult at breakfast time if you've got a child going off to school. An hour before lunch, which is even more difficult if the child's at school. And I say to parents, you need to give the medicine into the school, make sure it's kept in the fridge, and just tell the teacher it has to be given an hour before meals. The reason for doing this is, first of all, the antibiotic in those cases doesn't work very well if you take it with food. It's not absorbed properly into the body. And what we try and do by spacing the medicine out is making sure that we've got the right plasma levels, the blood levels, to make sure that we get the right dose for the child and make sure that the infection is cleared up. And antibiotics now are very, very precious. They're only used if your child's really quite ill. And so that's why we want you to use them properly. And in terms of things like paracetamol, it's been drummed into you no more than 4 doses in 24 hours. So that obviously means the one in the middle of the night, you've got to count that as well. And ibuprofen, which is another useful medicine for bringing down temperature, it should be given after food, because it's really quite hard in the tummy, and therefore no problems if you give it after food. So the message really is, the first port of call for any minor ailments is, of course, your community pharmacy. Come in and see us. And if you want any more information on when to give medicines, just ask. We're absolutely delighted to talk about your particular medicine, the medicine you're giving your child. Now, the dreaded threadworms, one of my relatives said to me, it's ridiculous, how could my child possibly have threadworms? Well, unfortunately, they are all over the place, the little eggs. They cannot see them by the naked eye, and so they're absolutely everywhere. They're in bedding, they're in your child's toys, and really it's about 40% of young children under 10 are probably infected in some way. So, but it is very easy to treat. You must treat the whole family at the same time. So that's the parents, and the children in the house, brothers and sisters, all have to be treated at one time. And it's usually just one chewable tablet. And you can repeat it in 14 days, but not necessarily. And the